Hello and welcome to this edition of Consciousness Raising Online. I'm going to jump right into this because I want to cover as much as I can in the shortest period of time. I'm not going to be long, as I like to say. Couple of things here real quick. The title of this particular session is Wrongly Convicted, Unjustly Imprisoned, Finally Freed. I'm going to cover some of the most egregious cases where black folks were wrongly convicted and then imprisoned sometimes for years. And then in these particular cases, they eventually were were freed or exonerated. But I want to keep in mind a couple of things. One is that it's never just one person who's affected the most by a wrongful conviction. It's a family, and it's also a community. And so some of these cases, I want you to bear in mind that it didn't just affect those people and those families, it affected whole communities. And when I say whole communities, think of it like this. When someone is wrongly convicted in a particular community, there's something out of balance. Number one, justice is out of balance. And also, the person who really did the crime is still out there, committing more crimes in many cases. So there's a lack of balance. And also, one of the things about that balance is the toll that it takes on the community over a period of time. Think about it in terms of the fathers who are not able to be there for their children in the best way or provide for their families in the best way, either psychologically or financially or spiritually or whatever. And the toll it takes on is particularly the young people, but family members in particular, who are disillusioned by seeing their loved one wrongly convicted, okay? Especially in a lot of cases, they know that they weren't guilty, but the system did not care. The people running the system did not care. The police didn't care. The prosecutors didn't care, the judges didn't care. And so that beats down on the people. So, like I say, I want to deal with the idea that these aren't just cases of people who are wrongly convicted and then imprisoned and then eventually freed. One of the things I want you to bear in mind is that you will hear sometimes people say after somebody's been released, after they did 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, they'll say, oh, it shows that the system works. Justice, we finally have justice. No, that's not true. When you take years from people's lives, you hurt them in a way that even money can't repair that. That's stolen. So I want you to bear in mind as we go through these particular cases, how many years are being stolen? How many years are being stolen and they can never be replaced? Okay? The first case is a brother by the name of Hugh Aburton. In 1991, at the age of 16, he was arrested for killing his mother. His confession was coerced by detectives, and after spending nearly 20 years behind bars and another 10 on parole, he was finally exonerated in 2019. Think about that. He not only did almost 20 years in prison, he did another 10 on parole. So almost 30 years before he was finally exonerated. And for killing his mother, of all things. Okay, now here's one that really touches what I was talking about the years. These two gentlemen in the front. That's Clifford Williams Jr. on the right and his nephew, Nathan Myers. They were exonerated and released. But listen to this. They were convicted. Let's see, Myers, the young man, the nephew, was 18 when he was arrested. Mr. Williams, on the right, his uncle, was 33 when he was arrested. Myers was 18, he's now 61. Mr. Williams was 33 and he's now 76 years old. They come to the two of them together, the amount of time that they were incarcerated, 86 years. 86 years for a crime they did not commit. Did you hear what I'm saying? 86 years. Now, this is Mr. Williams, Clifford Williams. He may receive $2.15 million in compensation from the state of Florida for being wrongfully convicted and incarcerated. Because Florida is one of the few states where you can get up to $50,000 per year for every year you were wrongly incarcerated. And the problem is that it's in Florida. Florida has a bad habit of, how they treat us. But yeah, I just can't get over that. 86 years, y'all, that they stole from those two young men. Now, Calvin Bright served 25 years in prison for a 1994 double murder that he did not commit. Evidence was recently uncovered which proved his innocence. He has maintained since his conviction. 25 years. 25 years. Y'all, is anybody adding up all these years? Here's Kevin Baker and Sean Washington. They were wrongly accused of a double murder in Camden, New Jersey in 1995. They spent 25 years behind bars before they were exonerated. Here's Theophilus Wilson. Now, Theophilus Wilson was 17 years old when he was falsely accused of a triple murder in Philadelphia and sentenced to life in prison. He spent 28 years in prison before he was exonerated, meaning, and it wasn't just that he was let go, they uncovered enough evidence to show that he was wrongly convicted and wrongfully and unjustly imprisoned. Look at him. He was 17 when he went in there. He spent 28 years. Now, this is Alfred Chestnut. And let me see, let me get this right. Alfred Chestnut, Ransom, Watkins, and Andrew Stewart. They walked out of the Baltimore City Courthouse after 36 years for a crime they did not commit. The three of them were accused of killing 14-year-old DeWitt Duckett for his starter jacket in 1983. They were released after 36 years. Let me back up so you can see them again. That's Alfred Chestnut, Ransom, Watkins, and Andrew Stewart. 36 years. Now, I understand all three of them did 36 years. So add it up together. What's that? It's over 100 years, ain't it? That they took from those, from not just from them, but from their families and their communities. It's almost 2 generations, because the generation is roughly 20 years. Okay? Here's one that's it's kind of weird. DeAndre Charles was 15 years old when he was arrested for killing a rabbi named Joseph Ransom in August of 2014. Prosecutors used this sketch that you can see right here when they wrongfully convicted him. Look at that sketch. That looks like something that a child would draw. And they used that to convict DeAndre Charles. He was eventually, in fact, they said he was 15 years old and was accused of gunning down this rabbi. But eventually, he was exonerated and released. But can you imagine they show up with a drawing like that and say that's you and use that in a courtroom to convict you? Here's Anthony Ray Hinton. He was wrongfully convicted of 2 murders that took place in Jefferson County, Alabama in 1985. Despite having no witnesses and no fingerprint evidence, the state convicted him by saying the murder weapon, a gun, was at his mother's house. That turned out, number one, to be untrue. He spent nearly 30 years in prison for the murder he didn't commit. He was exonerated in 2015. There's a movie called Just Mercy. It's based on his life. And the brother down there in Alabama that has the Center for Justice, he deals with the lynchings and all of that. I can't think of it right now, but y'all know what I'm talking about. He had a lot to do with the movie. And this brother, in fact, I think he works, the brother here, Hinton, I think he works in that center. Okay? His name is Anthony Ray Hinton. And, you know, I loved looking at his photo with his smile because after he did nearly 30 years in Alabama prison, you know, it just boggles my mind. All right, this is Lamar Johnson. He did more than 13 years in prison, and a judge threw out his wrongful conviction. And this happened after 3 new witnesses came forward to say he was not the gunman who killed Carlos Sawyer in 2004. Well, he still looks like very much like a young man. And we can just say, thank goodness. That's his mama crying, happy crying, okay? Here's a case. His name is Wilbur Jones. He was arrested in 1971 at the age of 19 and convicted of rape in 1974. He was finally freed from prison in Louisiana after serving 43 years for a crime he didn't commit. Now, here's the thing. A judge overturned his conviction, but they still would not release him for several weeks until he paid a $2,000 bail. Because, see, the judge overturned his conviction, but the state was still saying, yeah, we're going to try him again. So they wouldn't let him out So he finally made bail of $2,000, and then after a while, the state realized they couldn't try this man again after 43 years. That was an insult to say, "Oh yeah, we're going to try him again. 43 years ago we convicted him. We'll convict him again 43 years later." Now here's a brother. You can't help but be affected by his smile. His name is Treymaine Joseph Hicks. Now dig this about Treymaine Joseph Hicks. He was accused of raping a woman. Now here's what he said happened. He said he heard her crying for help and went to assist her in 2001. The police arrived on the scene and promptly shot him in the back, claiming he had a gun. The jury that convicted him never saw evidence that would have presented reasonable doubt he committed the crime, especially video evidence that contradicted the police. The police claimed they shot him in the abdomen, meaning that he was coming towards them. He was shot in the back. And again, the fact that the woman said she could not identify her assailant, okay? And there was nothing that didn't say that he wasn't telling the truth, that he went to help this woman and they police drove up and shot him straight in the back right away. And we've seen that over and over again. And he did, that was 2001. And he was finally exonerated, I think it was last year, 2019. Okay? How you like that one? You get shot trying to help somebody, and then they convict you of raping a woman. Okay? Now here's one that I know most people are familiar with to some extent. They had for many years been called the Central Park Five. We, the public and black folks, don't call them that. We call them the Exonerated Five. Okay? Now here's what you got to understand. In 2002, the Exonerated Five, Raymond Santana, Kevin Richardson, Antron McCray, Yusef Salaam, and Corey Wise were released from prison after being wrongfully convicted of crimes related to the rape of a white woman in Central Park in 1989. The men, who were teens at the time, between the ages of 14 and 16, were labeled the Central Park Five. The prosecution of the teens was based on confessions they made after being interrogated by police with neither counsel nor the parents present. Their convictions were vacated after Matias Reyes, a convicted murderer and serial rapist serving a life sentence in prison, confessed to the crimes in 2001. They were exonerated in 2002. They filed a lawsuit against the city of New York for malicious prosecution, racial discrimination, and emotional distress, and received a $41 million settlement, which the city fought for a long time. They also sued New York State for additional damages. That was finally settled in 2016 for $3.9 million. Now, what we have to understand is that some of them had actually gotten out of prison, so they had done the time. And this was especially hard on them because they were 14 to 16 years old when this happened to them, and it made worldwide news. They even had a media term called wilding they made up for them. Said they were on the wild. The present resident of the White House named Trump, at that time, he took out full-page ads in several of New York newspapers calling for the death penalty for them. That's how hard he went about this, because he made it straight up like a lynch mob thing. You know, these savages should be strung up for defiling that white woman. Now, years later, when it was demonstrated that they didn't do it at all, he still clung to that. And even as president, he still would say that they were guilty. Now, Ava DuVernay did a movie about them and about their case. And the woman, the prosecutor, primary prosecutor against them, was very upset because it showed her to be wrong. And she was one of those who still was saying, no, 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 they were guilty. So, as sad as it is, as sad as it is, they had to live with that. And even with the money that they've gotten, for a couple of them, they've still had some serious psychological problems, because you can't do that to people and not expect that they will have some serious issues. But the exonerated 5, there's a case where, look at it, not just them, their families and their communities. They were black and Latino. And for years, their community and their families had to live with the shame that the public put on them and their families for something they didn't even do. All right, lastly, I have to bring it home, because most people don't know about the Englewood Four. I happen to live in Englewood. I grew up in part of my life in Englewood, and I live here today in the Englewood community. And the Englewood Four were teenagers who were coerced into confessing to a rape and murder they didn't commit. Michael Saunders, Vincent Thames, Harold Richardson, and Terrell Swift, they were between the ages of 15 and 18 when the police accused them of strangling Nina Glover, a 30-year-old black woman who they labeled as a prostitute, in 1994. Her naked body was found wrapped in a bloody sheet inside a dumpster. Now, they took them young men and convicted them of that. And they, in 2012, they filed a lawsuit that accused the Cook County prosecutor, several Chicago police detectives, of ignoring evidence that pointed to the real killer and chose instead to prosecute them. One of the former assistant state's attorneys, named Terrence Johnson, he broke ranks and confirmed their story to the federal investigators. And that's how they ended up being exonerated by DNA evidence. Now, they eventually agreed to a $31 million settlement for the wrongful conviction in Chicago. But they were known as the Englewood Four. Again, think about them, their families, and their community that were affected by a wrongful conviction. And none of the police, none of the prosecutors were ever prosecuted, or nothing was done to them. As in most cases, nothing is done to the prosecutors and the police. That's it. I wanted to go through these cases, not be long today. It just hurts my heart to see this. You all understand what I'm talking about. I think you got a good sense of it when you can watch this again, because it'll be placed up on recorded, so that you can go through again and count the years. Do that. Count the years. And think about how much that hurt these communities all across the country, from one side of the country to the other. And there were there are many more. Many more. And that's why we have to deal with this so-called justice system, because it has taken so much from us. And there are still, so many black men and women who are incarcerated wrongly. Some of them may never get out. But I hope that at least to some extent that today we'll understand a little bit more about the criminal justice system in the United States of America. I'm going to close now, as I always do, saying no justice, no peace, no love. KNOW.